economic, our spiritual, and our psychic life. I began to think that the evil is one thing, not many. That racial unrest, the emotional crazy quilt that drives our people in panic to the couches of the psychoanalysts, the fallout, dropout, cop-out insurgency of our children and young people, the rush to stimulant as well as hypnotic drugs, the rise of narrow, ugly, and vengeful cults of all kinds, the distrust and revolt against all authority, political, religious, or military, the awful and universal sense of apprehension and even terror, and this in a time of plenty such as has never been known. I think all these are manifestations of one single cause. We're afraid to be alone and afraid to be together. What has happened to us? Something deep and controlling and necessary. If I inspect my people and study them and criticize them, I must love them if I have any self-love. Since I can never be separate from them and can be no more objective about them than I am about myself. I am not young, and yet I wonder about my tomorrow. How much more, then, must my wonder be about the tomorrow of my people, a young people? In the foreword, John Steinbeck writes, "This is a book of opinions, unashamed and individual. It cannot even pretend to be objective truth. Of course, it is opinion, conjecture, and speculation. What else could it be? But at least it is informed by America, inspired by curiosity, impatience, some anger, and a passionate love of America and the Americans. For I believe that out of the whole body of our past, out of our differences, our quarrels, our many interests and directions, something has emerged that is itself unique in the world. America. America, complicated, paradoxical, bullheaded, shy, cruel, boisterous, unspeakably dear, and very beautiful. Perhaps my questioning is compounded of some fear, more hope, and great confidence.
Tonight's special presentation of John Steinbeck's America and Americans. Brought to you by Ronson, creators of flame products and electric appliances for personal care and the home. If Ronson can't make it better, Ronson doesn't make it.
The Ronson Variflame Comet, the fastest lighter alive. Loads fast. Fuel, Ronson Multifill. Butane. Available everywhere. Flint, 2 spares. You're never out of action. Even the spark wheel comes out, so a new one can go in. Trigger action. Fires fast. And the flame adjusts. For cigarettes, cigars, pipes. The fastest lighter alive. The Ronson Variflame Comet. From $6.95. A small price to pay for a reputation.
For over 40 years, John Steinbeck has written about his fellow Americans. In fiction and in nonfiction, he has portrayed and analyzed the American scene with a Nobel Prize among his credentials. Writing about himself in America and Americans, John says, I have lived and traveled in foreign countries where my bloodlines of Scottish, Irish, English, and German are common. My face has the features, good or bad, of my ancestry. My eyes are northern blue. My hair, before it whitened, was that no color which is described as brown. My cheeks are florid with the tiny vesicles showing through, so characteristic of the Scottish and the North Irish. But in spite of all this, I have never been taken as a European. Any sensitive European knows that I am an American. Somewhere there is an American look. I don't know what it is, and foreigners cannot describe it, but it is there. It is customary, indeed at high school graduations it is a requirement, for speakers to refer to America as a precious inheritance. Our heritage, a gift proffered like a sandwich wrapped in plastic on a plastic tray. Our ancestors, so it is implied, gathered to the invitation of a golden land and accepted the sacrament of milk and honey. This is not so. Far from welcoming us, this continent resisted us. The indigenes fought to the best of their ability to hold on to a land they thought was theirs. The rocky soils fought back, and the bewildering forests and the deserts. Diseases unknown and therefore incurable decimated the early comers. This land was no gift. The firstlings worked for it, fought for it, and died for it. America did not exist. 4 centuries of work, of bloodshed, of loneliness and fear created this land. We built America, and the process made us Americans, a new breed, rooted in all races, stained and tinted with all colors, a seeming ethnic anarchy. Then, in a little time, we became more alike than we were different. A new society, not great, but fitted by our very faults for greatness. E pluribus unum. The whole thing is crazy. Every single man in our emerging country was out for himself against all others, for his safety, his profit, his future. And when his family grew up about him, he set it against all other families. When communities arose, each one defended itself against other communities. The provinces, which became states, were each one a suspicious unit, with jealously held borders and duties, tolls, and penalties against strangers. How all these fragments of the peoples of the world who settled America became one people is not only a mystery, but quite contrary to their original wishes and intentions. From the first, we have treated our minorities abominably, the way the old boys do the new kids in school. All that was required to release this mechanism or oppression and sadism was that the newcomers be meek, poor, weak in numbers, and unprotected. Although it helped if their skin, hair, eyes were different, and if they spoke some language other than English or worshipped in some church other than Protestant. The Pilgrim Fathers took out after the Catholics and both clobbered the Jews. The Irish had their turn running the gauntlet, and after them the Germans, the Poles, the Slovaks, the Italians, the Hindus, the Chinese, the Japanese, the Filipinos, the Mexicans. To all these people we gave disparaging names: Micks, Sheenies, Krauts, Dagos, Wops, Ragheads, Yellow Bellies, and so forth. The turn against each group continued until it became sound, solvent, self-defensive, and economically anonymous. This very cruelty toward newcomers might go far to explain the speed with which the ethnic and national strangers merged with the Americans. As each minority became solvent, it ceased to be a target and became a market. And you do not run down someone to whom you hope to sell something. Minorities, sensing their power, began to use it, and to a large extent, this was a good thing. But there were losses of culture and just pure amusement, which is plain unfortunate.
What's in there? Did I have my box? Ho, ho.
What happened is one of the strange quirks of human nature. But perhaps it is a perfectly natural direction that was taken, since no child can long endure his parents. It seemed to happen by instinct. In spite of all the pressure the old people could bring to bear, the children of each ethnic group denied their background and their ancestral language. Despite the anger, the contempt, the jealousy, the self-imposed ghettos and segregation, something was loose in this land called America. Its people were Americans. The new generations wanted to be Americans more than they wanted to be Poles or Germans or Hungarians or Italians or British. They wanted this, and they did it. America was not planned. It became. The newcomers were of peasant stock, and they had their roots in a Europe where they had been landless. For the possession of land was the requirement and the proof of a higher social class than they had known. In America, they found beautiful and boundless land for the taking, and they took it. It is little wonder that they went land mad, because there was so much of it. They abandoned their knowledge of kindness to the land in order to maintain its usefulness. They cut and burned the forests to make room for crops. When they had cropped out a piece, they moved on, raping the country like invaders. It was full late when we began to realize that the continent did not stretch out to infinity, that there were limits to the indignities to which we could subject it. And heavy mechanical equipment were allowing us to ravage it even more effectively than we had with fire, dynamite, and gang clouds. Conservation came to us slowly. Early times, we were impressed and awed by the fantastic accidents of nature, like the Grand Canyon and Yosemite and Yellowstone parks. The Indians had revered them as holy places, visited by the gods, and all of us came to have somewhat the same feeling about them. As the feeling of preciousness of the things we had been destroying grew in Americans, more and more areas were set aside as national and state parks to be looked at but not injured. I have often wondered at the savagery and thoughtlessness with which our early settlers approached this rich continent. This tendency toward irresponsibility persists in very many of us today. Our rivers are poisoned by reckless dumping of sewage and toxic industrial wastes. The air of our cities is filthy and dangerous to breathe from the belching of uncontrolled products from combustion of coal, coke, oil, and gasoline. Through uninhibited spraying against one enemy, we have destroyed the natural balances our survival requires. Our towns are girdled with wreckage and the debris of our toys, our automobiles, and our packaged pleasures. Can and must be overcome if America and Americans are to survive. But many of us still conduct ourselves as our ancestors did, stealing from the future for our clear and present profit. Since the river polluters and the air poisoners are not criminal or even bad people, we must presume that they are heirs to the early conviction that sky and water are unowned and that they are limitless. But no longer do we Americans want to destroy wantonly. Our ability to conserve has not grown with our power to create, but this slow and sullen poisoning is no longer ignored or justified. Almost daily, the pressure of outrage among Americans grows. We're slow to learn, but we learn. When the superhighway was proposed in California, which would trample the redwood trees in its path, an outcry arose all over the land so strident and fierce that the plan was put aside. And we no longer believe that a man, by owning a piece of America, is free to outrage it. Americans, almost without exception, have a fear and a hatred of any perpetuation of power, political, religious, or bureaucratic. It is our national conviction that politics is a dirty, tricky, and dishonest pursuit, and that all politicians are crooks. The reason for this attitude is fairly obvious. We have had cynical and dishonest officials on all levels of our government. When their practices have been exposed, it has been with pyrotechnical publicity, which has dazzled us to blindness toward the great number of faithful, honest, and efficient political men who make our system workable. Such is the ruggedness of the path to election, the violence, the charges, the japes, and hurtful tricks, that it takes a special kind of man to run for public office. A man with armored skin and a practical knowledge of gutter fighting. And this is true on every level, from village school board to the presidency of the nation. That shy and sensitive men, no matter what their qualifications, are repelled. I have observed our politics as practiced in village and city wards, in county and state and in nation, and it is just as crazy and just as venal as I have suggested. How does it happen, then, that what emerges is a government more stable, more responsible, more permanent, trustworthy and respected than any other in the world? It is another of our paradoxes. In this we are lucky, watched over by a kindly and humorous deity. Or there is something inherent in our system which protects us from ourselves. Our nation was designed by a group of men ahead of their time and in some ways ahead of ours. They conceived a system capable of renewing itself to meet changing conditions, an instrument at once flexible and firm. We constantly rediscover the excellence of the architecture of our government. It has been proof not only against foreign attack, but against our own stupidities, which are sometimes more dangerous. The relationship of Americans to their president is a matter of amazement to foreigners. Of course, we respect the office and admire the man who can fill it. But at the same time, we inherently fear and suspect power. We are proud of the president, and we blame him for things he did not do. We are related to the president in a close and almost family sense. We inspect his every move and mood with suspicion. We insist that the president be cautious in speech, guarded in action, immaculate in his public and private life. And in spite of these imposed pressures, we are avidly curious about the man hidden behind the formal public image we have created. We have made a tough and unwritten code of conduct for him, and the slightest deviation brings forth a torrent of accusation and abuse. The president must be greater than anyone else, but not better than anyone else. We subject him and his family to close and constant scrutiny and denounce them for things that we ourselves do every day. A presidential slip of the tongue, a slight error in judgment, social, political, or ethical, can raise a storm of protest. We give the president more work than a man can do, more responsibility than a man should take, more pressure than a man can bear. We abuse him often and rarely praise him. We wear him out, use him up, eat him up. And with all this, Americans have a love for the president that goes beyond loyalty or party nationality. He is ours, and we exercise the right to destroy him. One of the generalities most often noted about Americans is that we are a restless, a dissatisfied, a searching people. We bridle and buck under failure, and we go mad with dissatisfaction in the face of success. We spend our time searching for security and hate it when we get it. For the most part, we are an intemperate people. We eat too much when we can, drink too much, indulge our senses too much. We work too hard, and many die under the strain. The result is that we seem to be in a state of turmoil all the time, both physically and mentally. We are able to believe that our government is weak, stupid, overbearing, dishonest, and inefficient. And at the same time, we're deeply convinced that it's the best government in the world, and we would like to impose it upon everyone else. We speak of the American way of life as though it involved the ground rules for the governance of heaven. We scramble and scrabble up the stony path toward the pot of gold we have taken to mean security. We trample friends, relatives, and strangers who get in the way of our achieving it. And once we get it, we shower it on psychoanalysts to try to find out why we're unhappy. We fight our way in and try to buy our way out. We're alert, curious, hopeful, and we take more drugs designed to make us unaware than any other people. We are self-reliant and at the same time completely dependent. We are aggressive and defenseless. We are complacent in our possessions, in our houses, in our education. But it is hard to find a man or woman who does not want something better for the next generation. Now there's a set of generalities for you, each one of them canceled out by another generality. Americans seem to live and breathe and function by paradox. But in nothing are we so paradoxical as in our passionate belief in our own myths. The paradoxes are everywhere. We shout that we're a nation of laws, not men, and then proceed to break every law we can, if we can get away with it. We boast of our dislike of highbrow art and music, and we have more and better attended symphonies, art galleries, and theaters than any country in the world. We fancy ourselves as hard-headed realists, but we will buy anything we see advertised, particularly on television. And we buy it not with reference to the quality or the value of the product, but directly as a result of the number of times we have heard it mentioned. We are afraid to be awake, afraid to be alone, afraid to be a moment without the noise and confusion we call entertainment. We detest abstract art and produce more of it than all the rest of the world put together. One of the characteristics most puzzling to a foreign observer is the strong and imperishable dream the American carries. Consider the dream of and the hunger for home. The very word can reduce nearly all of my compatriots to tears. Builders and developers never build houses, they build homes. The dream home is either in a small town or in a suburban area where grass and trees simulate the country. This dream home is a permanent seat, not rented, but owned. It is a center where a man and his wife grow graciously old, warmed by the radiance of well-washed children and grandchildren. On inspection, it is found that the dream has little to do with reality in American life. Many thousands of these homes are built every year, built, planted, advertised, and sold. And yet the American family rarely stays in one place for more than 5 years. The home and its equipment are purchased on time and are heavily mortgaged. The earning power of the father is almost always overextended, so that after a few years he is not able to keep up the payments on his loans. Right away the house is not big enough or in the proper neighborhood. Some of these movements back and forth seem to me a result of just pure restlessness, pure nervousness. Or perhaps suburban life falls and the family moves to the city where excitement and convenience beckon. It is an American dream that we are great hunters, trackers, woodsmen, dead shots with a rifle or a shotgun. And this dream is deeply held by Americans who have never fired a gun or hunted anything larger or more dangerous than a cockroach. The dreams of a people either create folk literature or find their way into it. And folk literature, again, is always based on something that happened. Our most persistent folk tales, constantly retold in books, movies, and television shows, concern cowboys, gunslinging sheriffs, and Indian fighters. And in these moral tales so deep set in us, virtue does not arise out of reason or orderly process of law. It is imposed and maintained by violence. I wonder whether this folk wisdom is the story of our capability. Are these stories permanent because we know within ourselves that only the threat of violence makes it possible for us to live together in peace? These dreams describe our vague yearnings toward what we wish were and hope we may be, wise, just, compassionate, and noble. The fact that we have this dream at all is perhaps an indication of its possibility. Attempt to describe the America of today must take into account the issue of racial equality, around which much of our thinking and our present-day attitudes turn. We will not have overcome the trauma that slavery has left on our society, North and South, until we cannot remember whether the man we just spoke to in the street was Negro or white. The amendments to the Constitution guaranteeing the Negroes their freedom and their right to participate in government were completely annulled by local custom, law, and law enforcement officers, so that for nearly 100 years, Negroes, who often outnumbered the whites, were neither enfranchised nor free. For slavery, there were substituted the servitudes of debt, of need, of ignorance, and the constant reminders of inferiority. It is true that Negroes were free to go away if they wished to, and could, and many did, only to find that the North, which had fought for their emancipation, would not accept them save in the same terms as those the South applied. Now, 100 years later, American Negroes are surging toward the equality we promised them and did not give them in 1867. Negro leaders are for the most part educated, literate, thoughtful, and experienced men. The thrust of the movement, based on religion, has almost the discipline and force of religion itself. Negroes now have access to the wealth and to the ability to distribute it. Businessmen all over the country have finally come to see that what is bad for Negroes is eventually bad for business, and so for America. The force of Negro pressure, backed by a majority of white Americans, will not allow us to retire civil rights to the limbo in which the constitutional amendments hid their heads for 100 years. The only alternative is a federal law making any crime committed for the purpose of denying or inhibiting civil right a federal offense, subject to federal judges and federal juries, with the option of change of venue if the local authorities flout the law. The very great threat of such a law might possibly be effective in causing the states to take over their own salvation. There is no question that Negroes will get their equality at law. Not as soon as they should, but sooner than pessimists believe. But legal equality is only the smallest part of being equal. It is one of the less attractive of human traits that everyone wants to look down on someone, to be better than someone else. And since this is symptomatic of insecurity, humans in general do not seem to be very secure. The hurt in the Negro and the deep-seated suspicion of the white is matched only by the fear and suspicion of the white toward the Negro. And while there remains any vestige of such feeling, true equality cannot be achieved. In the constant pressure of the Negro causes, some thoughtless people ask, what are they after? What do they want? It's very simple. They want exactly the same things other Americans want. Peace, comfort, security, and love. The human wants everything he can conceive of, and as through education and understanding his concept grows broader, he will want more and different things, perhaps even better things. No good society can grow if its roots are in sterile soil. The changes of the last 20 years have been enormous. But we have come finally to the entrenched core of rebellion, which must be removed before we can travel on into a livable future. What Americans did discover earlier than most of the world was that ability had nothing to do with birth. But since every man wants admiration and perhaps some envy, we had only money and possessions to admire and envy. The rich in America of the middle period may have been cursed and disparaged, but they had chosen the one way to be noticed. The giants of money were usually the sons of poor men who clawed and grappled their way to great fortune, driven by memory of poverty and hardship. Quite naturally, they protected their children from the experience which had been the driving force. And since there was no government approval of backing of individual families, the second generation of great wealth as a rule went to pieces in weakness, self-indulgence, and stupidity. Today, instead of the old, highly visible capitalist, we have the corporation, one of the strangest organisms in the present world. It may manufacture goods for sale, operate mines, manipulate money, bore oil wells, and crack the product into usable components, produce steel, copper, nickel, or tungsten, operate arms, or it may purchase the products of another corporation and distribute them. But its purpose is always to make money. The corporation, to exist at all, must be efficient, must produce its product or perform its function for a minimum of cost and a maximum of profit. Since the most costly ingredient of any business operation is labor, the early corporations tried to keep labor costs at a minimum. They settled in areas where labor, because of its competition with itself, was cheap. When working men began to organize to pit group action against the employing agent, the corporations fought tooth and nail against the growing organization of labor. We can all remember the warfare, company thugs against union goons, the riots, the murders, the wreckage, and particularly the loud and the piercing charges, on the one hand that labor was treasonable to business, and on the other that fat, cold-hearted capitalism was exploiting the working man and requiring enforced poverty for its purposes. The warfare against organized labor was costly, as all wars are. And furthermore, the workers willing to accept the wages and conditions required were so ignorant, inept, and inefficient that production costs went up and profits went down. Also, as Americans generally acquired more money, they bought shares in the more efficient corporations, so that the whole nature of the ownership changed and broadened. Gradually, the shareholders became increasingly a cross-section of lively Americans, and it was early discovered that 11 men, each with 100 shares, could outvote one man with 1,000. The shareholders asked one simple question: is the corporation making money, or isn't it? In America, we have developed the corporation man. His life, his family, his future, as well as his loyalty, lie with his corporation. His training, his social life, the kind of car he drives, the clothes he and his wife wear, the neighborhood he lives in, and the kind and cost of his house and furniture are all dictated by his corporate status. By reason of the simplicity of its end, making money, the corporation is much more efficient than any existing government. An oil company may extend into transportation, or a food processing firm invest its profits in magazines. But there is one thing the corporation cannot do. It cannot order the writing of good books and plays, the painting of great pictures, the composing of exquisite music. Where it has entered such fields, it has succeeded only in adulterating the product and eventually destroying the producer. In the production of food, clothing, shelter, minor entertainment, and the gadgetry of comfort, the corporation has not only fulfilled our needs, but sometimes created them. Only in our yearning toward greatness is it helped us. Faced with, both as a people and as individuals. In very many people, this problem is a gray and leaden weight, heavy to all and unbearable to some. We discuss it constantly, and yet there's not even a name for it. It is a creeping, evil thing that is invading every cranny of our political, our economic, our spiritual, and our psychic life. I began to think that the evil is one thing, not many. That racial unrest, the emotional crazy quilt that drives our people in panic to the couches of the psychoanalysts, the fallout, dropout, cop-out insurgency of our children and young people, the rush to stimulant as well as hypnotic drugs, the rise of narrow, ugly, and vengeful cults of all kinds, the distrust and revolt against all authority, political, religious, or military, the awful and universal sense of apprehension and even terror, and this in a time of plenty such as has never been known. I think all these are manifestations of one single cause. We are afraid to be alone and afraid to be together. What has happened to us? Something deep and controlling and necessary. I'm not going to preach about any good old days. By our standards of comfort, they were pretty awful. What did they have then that we are losing or have lost? Well, for one thing, they had rules. Rules concerning life, limb, and property. Rules governing deportment, manners, conduct, and rules defining dishonesty, dishonor, misconduct. The rules were not always obeyed, but they were believed in. Once Adlai Stevenson, speaking of a politician of particularly rancid practices, said, "If he were a bad man, I wouldn't be so afraid of him. But this man has no principles. He doesn't know the difference." Could this be our difficulty, that gradually we are losing our ability to tell the difference? The rules fall away in chunks, and in a vacant place we have generality. It's all right because everybody does it. It is hard to criticize the people one loves. I knew this would be a painful thing to write, but I am far from alone in my worry. My mail is full of it, letters of anxiety. Americans, very many of them, are obsessed with tensions. Nerves are drawn tense and twanging. Emotions boil up and spill over into violence, largely in meaningless or unnatural directions. The huge reservoir of the anger of frustration is full to bursting. The legal and criminal distribution of sleeping pills and pep pills is astronomical. The first, opening escape into sleep, and the second, access to a false personality, a biochemical costume in which to strut. Kicks increasingly take the place of satisfaction. Of love, only the word, bent and bastardized, remains. It does remind me of something. Have you ever seen a kennel of beautiful, highly bred and trained and specialized bird dogs? And have you seen those same dogs when they're no longer used? In a short time, their skills and certainties and usefulness are gone. They become quarrelsome, fat, lazy, cowardly, dirty, and utterly disreputable and worthless. And all because their purpose is gone, and with it the rules and disciplines that made them beautiful and good. Is that what we are becoming, a national kennel of animals with no purpose and no direction? For 1,000,000 years we had a purpose, simple survival. The finding, planting, gathering, or killing of food to keep us alive, of shelter to prevent our freezing. This was a strong incentive. Add to it defense against all kinds of enemies, and you have our species' history. But now we have food, shelter, transportation, and the more terrible hazard of leisure. I strongly suspect that our moral and spiritual disintegration grows out of our lack of experience with plenty. But we are also poisoned with things. Having many things seems to create a desire for more things, more clothes, houses, automobiles. We are trapped and entangled in things. What happened to us came quickly and quietly, came from many directions, and was the more dangerous because it wore the face of good. Almost unlimited new power took the place of straining muscles and bent backs. Machinery took the heavy burden from our shoulders. Medicine and hygiene cut down infant mortality almost to the vanishing point. And at the same time extended our lifespan. Automation began to replace our workers. Where once the majority of our people worked the land, machines, chemistry, and a precious few produced more food than we needed or could possibly use. Leisure, which again had been the property of heaven, came to us before we knew what to do with it. And all these good things falling on us unprepared constitute calamity. We have the things, and we have not had time to develop a way of thinking about them. We struggle with our lives in the present and our practices in the long and well-learned past. We have had 1,000,000 years to get used to the idea of fire, and only 20 to prepare ourselves for the productive, destructive tidal wave of atomic fission. We retire men and women at the age of their best service for no other reason than that we need their jobs for younger people. To allow ourselves the illusion of usefulness, we have standby crews for functions which no longer exist. We manufacture things we do not need and try, by false and vicious advertising, to create a feeling of need for them. We have found no generally fulfilling method for employing our leisure. To repeat, we have not had time to learn inside ourselves the things that have happened to us. And finally, we can come back to morals. Ethics, morals, codes of conduct are the stern rules which in the past we needed to survive as individuals, as groups, as nations. Now, although we give lip service to survival, we are embarrassed and beginning to be smothered by our own numbers. Americans who are makers and lovers of statistics are usually puzzled and irritated when it is suggested that we are a statistic. But neither the sleeping pills, the church, nor the psychiatrist can long hide from us that economic laws apply to ourselves, that increased supply causes a drop in value, that we already have too many people and are in the process of producing far too many. Remember when we gave our Occidental sniff and observed that in China life was cheap? It never occurred to us that it could become cheap to us. Those codes of conduct we call morals were evolved for this thinly inhabited continent when a man's life was important because he was rare and he was needed. Could it be that below the level of thought our people sensed the danger of the swarming, crowding invasion of America by Americans? Starvation, pestilence, plague, which once cut us down, are no longer possible. And war? Well, during the last war, with all its slaughter, the world's population increased. Are people genuinely afraid of the bomb, or do they look to it to do the job we have eliminated from nature? There seems to be little sense of horror when authority states that with the first exchange of bombs, 100 million Americans will die. It is probable that here is where morals, integrity, ethics, even charity have gone. The rules allowed us to survive, to live together, and to increase. But if our will to survive is weakened, if our love of life and our memories of a gallant past and faith in a shining future are removed, what need is there for morals or for rules? Even they become a danger. I have named the destroyers of nations comfort, plenty, and security, out of which grow a bored and slothful cynicism in which rebellion against the world as it is, and myself as I am, are submerged in listless self-satisfaction. A dying people tolerates the present, rejects the future, and finds its satisfactions in past greatness and half-remembered glory. A dying people arms itself with defensive weapons and mercenaries against change. When greatness recedes, so does belief in greatness. A dying people invariably concedes that poetry has gone, that beauty has withered away. Then mountains do not rise up as they once did against the sky, and girls are not as pretty. Ecstasy fades to toleration. Agony subsides to a dull aching. Vision dims like the house lights in a theater, and the world is finished. As it is with a poet, so it is with the people. It is in the American negation of these symptoms of extinction that my hope and confidence lie. We're not satisfied. Our restlessness, perhaps inherited from the hungry immigrants of our ancestry, is still with us. Young Americans are rebellious, angry, searching like terriers near a rat's nest. Wasted energy is only a little problem compared to its lack. If the world were walled and boundaried as it once was in feudal towns, we could destroy the irritant of creative restlessness, punish the lively guilty, and subside. But the world is open as it has never been before. And for the first time in human experience, we have the tools to work with. 3/5 of the world and perhaps 4/5 of the world's wealth lie under the sea, and we can get to it. Americans do not lack places to go and new things to find. We have cut ourselves off from the self-abuse of war by raising it from a sin to an extinction. Far larger experiences are open to our restlessness. The fascinating unknown is everywhere. How will the Americans act and react to a new set of circumstances for which new rules must be made? We know from our past some of the things we will do. We will make many mistakes. We always have. We are in a perplexing period of change. We seem to be running in all directions at once, but we are running.
And I believe that our history, our experience in America, has endowed us for the change that is coming. We have never sat still for long. We have never been content with a place, a building, or with ourselves. We have failed sometimes, taken wrong paths, paused for renewal, filled our bellies, and licked our wounds. But we have never slipped back. Never. Revolt against what is in the air, in the resentment against injustice and inequality, and against imperceptible or cynical cruelty. There is blind anger against delay, against the long preparation for the long journey, perhaps the longest, darkest journey of all, with the greatest light at the end of it. The great and mysterious mind and soul of man.
Tonight's special presentation of John Steinbeck's America and Americans. Brought to you by Ronson, creators of flame products and electric appliances for personal care and the home. If Ronson can't make it better, Ronson doesn't make it.
In this time period, see American Profile, The Forgotten Peninsula, in color.
Around the world or at home, you can rely on NBC for the best comprehensive analysis of the latest domestic and international news. See the award-winning news coverage of television's top reporters, brought to you first here on NBC.
come to me. And that brings to a close for this Sunday afternoon my portion
of accent on music.
Good afternoon. This is Randall Chase welcoming you to the last two portions of Accent on Music for this Sunday afternoon here on KGLA FM in Los Angeles. We opened with two selections from our feature album scheduled in FM and Fine Arts magazine for this hour. Pearly Shells, Billy Vaughn. You heard the title tune, and Peg of My Heart. The correct KGLA time, 6 minutes past 4 o'clock.